There is a bridge in the city of Hiroshima shaped like the letter T. American bombardiers had studied it for weeks. It was, by design, one of the most precisely photographed targets of the entire war. And on the morning of August 6, 1945, it was the bullseye for the most destructive weapon ever used in human history. They missed it by almost 800 feet. That single detail, a near miss, on a mission remembered as one of perfect, terrible precision, is where our story begins. Because almost everything you think you know about this day is only part of the truth. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Hitler was dead. But in the Pacific, American planners were staring at a grim set of numbers. Okinawa had just cost over 12,000 American lives and perhaps 100,000 Japanese lives, military and civilian combined, in a single battle for a single island. An invasion of the Japanese home islands, codenamed Operation Downfall, was projected by some planners to cost hundreds of thousands more American casualties, and Japanese losses potentially in the millions. 2 years earlier, in the deserts of New Mexico, a team led by physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer and General Leslie Groves had been racing to build something that had never existed, a weapon powered by nuclear fission. On July 16, 1945, they succeeded. The Trinity test lit up the New Mexico sky before dawn, and one witness, physicist Kenneth Bainbridge, turned to Oppenheimer afterward and said simply that now they were all sons of bitches. President Harry Truman, barely 3 months into office after Franklin Roosevelt's sudden death, learned the full scope of the bomb's power while at the Potsdam Conference in Germany. He now held a decision no American president had ever faced. Here is where the story most people know starts to diverge from what actually happened. The decision to use the bomb was not universal or uncontested, not even among the scientists who built it. In July 1945, physicist Leo Szilard, one of the original minds behind the Manhattan Project, circulated a petition among his colleagues urging Truman to demonstrate the weapon first, perhaps on an uninhabited island, before ever using it on a city. Dozens of scientists signed it. Secretary of War Henry Stimson personally intervened on a different matter entirely. When shown the list of proposed targets, Stimson demanded that the ancient city of Kyoto be removed, not for military reasons, but because he and his wife had honeymooned there years before, and he believed destroying a city of such cultural and religious significance would permanently poison Japanese-American relations for generations to come. Kyoto was struck from the list. Hiroshima, a city that housed a major military headquarters and had been largely spared conventional bombing, specifically so the effects of an atomic weapon could be clearly measured, took its place. This is the part of the story rarely told in classrooms. The targeting of these cities was not simply a military inevitability. It involved arguments, personal convictions, and choices made by individual men who understood, at least in part, what they were choosing. The B-29 bomber selected to carry the weapon was piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, a 30-year-old officer who had personally selected and trained the 509th Composite Group for this singular purpose. The night before the mission, Tibbets named the aircraft after his mother, Enola Gay. At 8:15 in the morning on August 6th, Bombardier Thomas Farabee released the weapon, nicknamed Little Boy, from 31,000 feet. It fell for 43 seconds. Below, in the city, a 13-year-old girl named Sadako Sasaki was walking near her home, roughly a mile from the blast center. She survived the initial explosion.
10 years later, she would be diagnosed with leukemia, one of thousands of delayed casualties from radiation exposure. And during her hospital stay, she began folding paper cranes, inspired by a Japanese legend that folding 1,000 would grant a wish. Her story would later become one of the most recognized human symbols of the bombing's long aftermath, and paper cranes are still sent to Hiroshima's Peace Memorial by visitors from around the world today. Estimates of the dead in Hiroshima by the end of 1945, including those who died in the following months from burns, radiation sickness, and injuries, range widely between roughly 90,000 and 146,000 people, the vast majority of them civilians.
3 days later, on August 9th, a second B-29 named Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, took off carrying a plutonium weapon nicknamed Fat Man. Its intended target was not Nagasaki at all. It was the city of Kokura, home to one of Japan's largest military arsenals. Kokura was saved that morning by smoke and haze drifting over the city from a conventional firebombing raid on a nearby town the day before. After 3 passes, unable to get a clear visual sighting required for the mission, Sweeney diverted to the secondary target, Nagasaki. Bombardier Kermit Behan released the weapon over the city's industrial Urakami Valley at 11:02 a.m. Among the dead were an unknown number of Allied prisoners of war being held in a camp near the blast zone, along with Japanese civilians, factory workers, and tragically some of the very same Mitsubishi shipyard workers whose labor had built parts of the Japanese war machine. One survivor's story stands apart from every other account of the war. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, an engineer for Mitsubishi, had been in Hiroshima on business on August 6th. Badly burned, he made his way home to Nagasaki in time to survive the second bombing 3 days later. He remains the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as a survivor of both atomic bombings. He lived until 2010, becoming an outspoken advocate for nuclear disarmament in his final decades. This is the myth worth confronting directly. Many Americans grew up believing the atomic bombs alone forced Japan's surrender. The full historical picture is more complicated, and historians still debate it today. On August 8th, between the 2 bombings, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and launched a massive invasion of Japanese-occupied Manchuria. For Japan's military leadership, this shattered their last diplomatic hope. They had been quietly hoping the still neutral Soviets might help broker a negotiated peace. That hope collapsed within hours. Inside Japan's government, a bitter split emerged. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo and other civilian leaders pushed for surrender. A faction of military hardliners, led by figures like War Minister Korichika Anami, wanted to fight on, believing a costly defense of the home islands might still force better surrender terms. Some historians argue it was the combined shock of the second bomb and the Soviet declaration, not either alone, that finally tipped the balance. On August 14, 1945, a group of army officers even attempted a coup to seize the emperor's surrender recording and prevent it from being broadcast. The coup failed within hours. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's recorded voice was broadcast to the Japanese public for the first time in history, announcing Japan's surrender. World War II was over. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were rebuilt. Today, they are modern cities of well over 1 million people combined, and both serve as centers for the global nuclear disarmament movement. The debate over whether the bombings were a necessary end to a brutal war or an avoidable tragedy has never fully settled among historians, veterans' families, and the American public alike. It remains one of the most argued-over decisions in modern history, precisely because it was made by people under enormous pressure without the benefit of hindsight we now have. What is certain is this: real people with names, families, and futures, Sadako Sasaki, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, and hundreds of thousands more never individually remembered, lived through the single most destructive moment in the history of warfare. Their stories deserve to be told with the full weight and complexity they carry, not reduced to a single sentence in a textbook. 80 years later, the questions raised in the summer of 1945 are still being asked. Was it necessary? Could it have ended differently? We may never fully agree, but we can make sure the people who lived it are never forgotten. If your own family carries a story from this era, a veteran, a letter home, a memory passed down, we'd be honored to hear it in the comments below. And if you want to understand the decisions that came just before this one, our video on the Potsdam Conference is linked right here. Thank you for watching WWII Staff.